The rope burned against Elena's wrists as lightning split the sky above her. Rain lashed her face like frozen needles, and the wind howled through the abandoned mining camp with a fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. She had been tied to the hitching post for 3 hours now, left to die by the men who had taken everything from her father's ranch, her dignity, and nearly her life. Thunder crashed overhead, and Elena pulled desperately against her bonds. The rough hemp had already torn her skin raw, and blood mixed with rainwater as it dripped from her fingers. Her wedding dress, once pristine white silk, now clung to her body like a burial shroud, torn and muddied from her struggle. She had trusted Marcus Blackwood, had believed his promises of love and protection when he asked for her hand in marriage, but the ceremony had been a sham illegal maneuver to steal her inheritance. The moment the papers were signed, his men had dragged her from the church and brought her here to this godforsaken place, to die. The storm grew more violent by the minute. Trees bent nearly horizontal in the wind, and debris flew through the air like deadly missiles. Elena's strength was failing. Her vision blurred as hypothermia began to set in, and she could feel consciousness slipping away like sand through her fingers. That's when she heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats, cutting through the storm's roar. Horse and rider materialized from the darkness, moving with purpose through the chaos. The man sat tall in his saddle, his black coat whipping behind him like wings. Even through the rain and wind, Elena could see the determined set of his shoulders. The way he guided his mount with expert precision toward her dot as he drew closer. Lightning illuminated his face, strong jaw, piercing blue eyes, and a scar that ran from his left temple to his cheek. She had never seen him before, but something about his presence filled her with hope she hadn't felt in hours. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots splashing in the mud as he approached. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "What kind of monsters do this to a woman?" He knelt beside her, his hands already working at the knots. His fingers were calloused and strong, but surprisingly gentle as they touched her torn wrists. "I'm going to get you out of here, ma'am. My name's Jake Morrison." Elena tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. They left me to die. "Not on my watch," Jake said grimly. The rope fell away, and Elena collapsed forward into his arms. Without hesitation, he swept her up, cradling her against his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his wet shirt, could smell the leather and sage scent of him, even through the storm. "My horse is strong enough to carry us both," he said, already moving toward the animal. "There's a cabin about 2 miles north. Can you hold on?" Elena nodded weakly, her arms wrapping around his neck. As Jake lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. His strong arms encircled her, shielding her from the worst of the storm as they rode into the night. The last thing she remembered, before unconsciousness claimed her, was the sound of his voice, low and reassuring in her ear. "I've got you now. You're safe." Elena woke to the crackle of fire and the scent of coffee brewing. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, and her wrists were bandaged with strips of clean cloth. She lay on a narrow bed covered with thick wool blankets, in a cabin that felt like a sanctuary after the hell she'd endured. Jake Morrison sat in a chair beside the fireplace, his long legs stretched out before him. He had changed into dry, simple white shirt and dark pants that emphasized his lean, muscular frame. His dark hair was tousled, and those piercing blue eyes watched her with concern. "How long was I unconscious?" Elena asked, her voice still rough from the storm. 2 days, Jake replied, setting down his coffee cup. "You had a fever. I was starting to worry you might not pull through." Elena tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. Jake was beside her in an instant, his hands gentle but firm as he helped her into a sitting position. "Easy now. Your body's been through trauma. Why did you help me?" she asked, studying his face. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read: pain, perhaps, or old anger, carefully controlled. Jake returned to his chair, but Elena noticed he kept his distance. "I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust. I know what it feels like to have everything stolen from you." His jaw tightened. "No one deserves what those men did to you." "You know about Marcus Blackwood." Jake's voice turned cold. "Oh, I know all about him. He's been buying up land all over the territory, using lawyers and hired guns to force people out. Your father's ranch was just another piece of his empire." Elena felt tears threaten. "My father built that ranch with his own hands. It was supposed to be my children's legacy." "Tell me what happened," Jake said quietly. "All of it." So Alina told him about her father's death 6 months ago, about the debts that had mysteriously appeared after the funeral, about Marcus's courtship and promises. She told him about the sham wedding, about overhearing Marcus's men planning to kill her once the inheritance was legally his dot. As she spoke, Jake's hands slowly clenched into fists. He's done this before, he said finally. There have been 3 other women in the past 2 years, rich widows, heiresses. They all had accidents shortly after marrying him. How do you know all this? Jake stood and walked to the window, staring out at the landscape beyond. Because one of those women was my sister, Catherine. She wrote to me about her engagement to a charming businessman named Marcus Blackwood. By the time I got to Denver, she was already dead, thrown from her horse, they said. But Cat was the best rider I ever knew. Elena's heart clenched. I'm so sorry. I've been tracking him for 8 months, Jake continued, following the trail of bodies and stolen fortunes. When I heard about your wedding, I knew I had to try to stop it. I was too late to prevent the ceremony, but I heard his men talking in the saloon about leaving you in the storm. You saved my life. Jake turned back to her, his eyes intense. And now I'm going to help you get your life back. But I need to know, are you willing to fight for it? Alina met his gaze steadily. Despite everything she'd been through, she felt a strength building inside her that she hadn't known existed. I'm willing to fight. Good. Because Blackwood thinks you're dead. That gives us an advantage. Jake walked to a cabinet and pulled out a gun belt. Do you know how to shoot? Alina shook her head. Then we'll start with that. But first, you need to get your strength back. He handed her a bowl of stew that had been warming by the fire. Eat. Rest. Tomorrow we begin planning Marcus Blackwood's downfall. The next morning, Alina discovered that Jake Morrison was a patient but demanding teacher. Despite her protests that she was still weak, he had her up before dawn, teaching her the basics of handling a gun. Your hands are shaking, he observed, standing behind her as she tried to aim at a tin can balanced on a fence post. Don't think about the gun as a weapon. Think of it as a tool like a hammer or a saw. Alina lowered the pistol, frustrated. I can't do this. Jake, I'm not a killer. Neither was I, until I had to be. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. The men who work for Blackwood won't hesitate to kill you. They've already tried once. Alina raised the gun again, and this time Jake stepped closer, his body warm against her back as he guided her arms. Breathe in, hold it, then squeeze the trigger slowly as you exhale. The proximity of him was distracting. Alina could feel the solid strength of his chest, could smell the soap and leather scent that seemed to cling to his skin. When the gun fired and the tin can went flying, she was surprised by her own accuracy. Better, Jake said, stepping back. Again. They practiced for hours, until Elena's shoulders ached and her ears rang from the gunshots. But she was improving, and more importantly, she was feeling stronger. The helpless victim who had been tied to that post was slowly being replaced by someone harder, more determined. Tell me about your sister, Alina said as they took a break for lunch. Jake's expression grew distant. Kat was 2 years younger than me. After our parents died, I raised her on our ranch in Colorado. She was beautiful, smart, and too trusting for her own good. He paused. She always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Like I did with Marcus. Marcus is a predator. He knows how to spot women who are vulnerable, women who are alone, who need protection. He becomes exactly what they need him to be, until he doesn't need them anymore. Alina set down her coffee cup. What was your sister's ranch like? 500 acres of the prettiest land you ever saw. Rolling hills, a creek that ran year-round, and the best grazing in the county. Kat loved that place more than anything. Jake's voice roughened. After she died, I couldn't stay there. Sold it to a neighbor for half what it was worth, and started tracking. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I suppose I'll figure it out when the time comes. That afternoon, Jake began teaching Alina about strategy. He spread out a map on the cabin's small table, marking the locations of Blackwood's holdings and the routes his men typically used. He's based in Redemption, about 50 miles south of here, Jake explained. The town's basically under his control. Sheriff, judge, most of the business owners. But he's got enemies too. People he's squeezed out, folks who've lost family to his schemes. So we're not alone in this. No, but we can't trust anyone completely. Blackwood has money, and money can buy loyalty or at least silence. Jake traced a route on the map. There's a woman named Sarah Chen who runs a boarding house in Redemption. Her husband was killed by Blackwood's men 2 years ago. She's been feeding information to anyone willing to stand against him. Alina studied the map, her mind working. If everyone knows what he's doing, why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because he's smart. He keeps his hands clean, uses lawyers and hired guns to do his dirty work. And the people he targets are always outsiders, people without family or connections. To protect them, like me, like you. But you're not dead, Alina. And as long as you're alive, you're a threat to him. The marriage was legal, which means you have legitimate claim to everything he stole from you. Alina felt a surge of hope. We can take him to court. Jake's expression was grim. Not in redemption. The judge there is in his pocket. But there's a federal judge in Denver who's been investigating territorial corruption. If we can get evidence to him, then we fight fire with fire. Exactly. But first, we need to survive long enough to get there. Alina's strength returned quickly over the following days, fueled by determination and Jake's steady encouragement. She practiced with the gun until she could hit a target consistently, and Jake taught her to ride his spare horse, a gentle mare named Rosie, who seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. You're a natural, Jake said, watching Alina guide Rosie through a series of turns. Most people take weeks to develop that kind of seat. My father taught me when I was young, Alina replied, patting the mare's neck. I just never rode anything. This spirited, before Jake smiled, the first genuine smile Alina had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. Kat would have liked you. She always said the best way to judge a person's character was to watch how they treated animals. Alina felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Over the past week, she had come to depend on Jake's presence, to look forward to their conversations by the fire in the evenings. He was unlike any man she had ever known, quiet, where Marcus had been charming. Honest, where Marcus had been deceptive. Gentle, where Marcus had been possessive. Jake, she said impulsively, when this is over, what if we don't? His voice was sharp, and the walls went back up in his eyes. Don't make plans based on what might happen. Focus on surviving. Alina felt stung by his rejection, but she pushed the hurt aside. He was right, they needed to concentrate on the immediate danger. That evening, Jake spread out the intelligence he had gathered about Blackwood's operation. Sarah Chen sent word through one of her contacts. Blackwood's planning to sell your father's ranch to a cattle company from Texas. The sale is scheduled for next week. He's moving fast. He has to. The longer you stay dead, the more questions people might ask. But the sale also gives us an opportunity. Jake pointed to a spot on the map. The meeting is happening at the old Riverside Hotel in Redemption. If we can get there, we might be able to confront him with witnesses present. Alina studied the map. It's risky. We'll be walking into his territory, surrounded by his people. Yes, but it's also our best chance to expose him publicly. If we can force him to admit what he's done in front of the cattle buyers, they'll back out of the deal. Businessmen don't like to be associated with scandal. Alina nodded slowly. What about evidence? It's his word against mine. Jake pulled out a leather portfolio. I've been collecting testimonies from people Blackwood has wronged. Letters, legal documents, witness statements, and I found something else: correspondence between Blackwood and his lawyer about the other women who died. They were careless, left a paper trail. Alina's heart raced. That's enough to have him arrested. In Denver, yes, but we have to get there first. Jake's expression grew serious. Alina, I need you to understand something. Once we start this, there's no going back. Blackwood will do everything in his power to stop us. It's going to be dangerous. Alina met his gaze steadily. I understand, but I can't live in hiding forever, and I can't let him keep hurting other women. All right then. Jake began rolling up the map. We leave tomorrow night. There's a full moon, so we'll have light to travel by. We'll circle around Redemption and approach from the east, where his patrols are lightest. And if something goes wrong, Jake's hand moved to rest on his gun. Then we improvise. Alina nodded, trying to ignore the fear that coiled in her stomach. Jake, I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm grateful for everything you've done. He looked at her for a long moment, and Alina saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked like longing. Get some rest, he said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. They left the cabin under cover of darkness, Alina's heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Jake had given her his sister's clothes, practical riding attire. That fit her well enough, though everything reminded her of the woman who had died, trying to escape Marcus's trap. Stay close, Jake murmured, as they guided their horses through the moonlit landscape. And if I tell you to run, don't argue. Just go. Alina nodded, though she had no intention of abandoning him if things went wrong. Over the past week, Jake had become more than her rescuer, he had become her anchor. The one person in the world she trusted completely. The journey to redemption took them through rough country, following game trails and creek beds to avoid the main roads where black men might be patrolling. Jake knew the territory well, guiding them around obstacles with the confidence of someone who had spent years in the saddle. How long have you been tracking him? Alina asked during one of their brief rest stops. Since the day I buried my sister. Jake's voice was quiet, but filled with steel. I sold everything I owned, spent every penny I had, hiring investigators and following leads. Marcus Blackwood has been the center of my world for 8 months. And when it's over, Jake looked at her, and for a moment the mask he wore slipped. I haven't let myself think about that. Revenge has been the only thing keeping me going. Alina felt her heart ache for him. Revenge won't bring Catherine back. No, Jake agreed. But it might prevent him from destroying someone else's life. They rode in comfortable silence after that. The only sounds, the soft thud of hoofbeats and the distant call of nightbirds. Alina found herself studying Jake's profile in the moonlight, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. How could she have been so foolish? Jake had made it clear that he wasn't interested in anything beyond completing his mission. And she was still legally married to Marcus Blackwood, still trapped in a web of lies and deception. We're almost there, Jake said, pointing to a glow on the horizon. Redemption's just over that ridge. Alina pushed her confused feelings aside and focused on the task ahead. They needed to be smart, careful, and above all, they needed to survive the night. Jake led them to a grove of trees overlooking the town. Redemption was bigger than Alina had expected. A bustling community with electric lights and well-maintained buildings. It looked prosperous, civilized. It was hard to believe that such corruption could exist in a place that appeared so normal. There's the Riverside Hotel, Jake said, pointing to a 3-story building near the center of town. And that's Black's house. He indicated a large mansion on the hill, overlooking the main street. Alina shuddered. He's living in luxury while people suffer. Not for much longer. Jake pulled out a spyglass and studied the hotel. The cattle buyers arrived this afternoon. I can see their wagon. If an opportunity presents itself, we take it. But we don't take unnecessary risks. Alina nodded, settling in for what she knew would be a long night. But as she watched the lights of redemption twinkle below them, she felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she was no longer the helpless victim who had been tied to that post. She was a woman with a purpose, fighting for her life and her future. And she wasn't fighting alone. The Riverside Hotel's dining room buzzed with activity as Alina and Jake took their positions. Alina had disguised herself with a wide-brimmed hat and her hair pinned up, while Jake had traded his cowboy attire for a businessman's suit that made him look like any other cattleman in town. There he is, Jake murmured, nodding toward a man in an expensive suit who had just entered the room. Alina's blood ran cold. Marcus Blackwood looked exactly as she remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and cold gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned the world, greeting the cattle buyers with practiced charm. Remember, Jake whispered, we need him to incriminate himself. Let him talk. Alina's hands trembled as she watched Marcus shake hands with the buyers. This was the man who had promised to love and protect her, who had looked into her eyes and sworn sacred vows. The man who had ordered her death without a moment's hesitation. Gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. I'm afraid there's been a slight delay with the ranch transfer. My wife was tragically killed in an accident last week. Very sad. But these things happen. Alina's vision blurred with rage. He was already spinning the story, painting himself as the grieving widower. The good news, Marcus continued, is that the property is now mine free and clear. No complications with inheritance or other claims. One of the buyers, a heavy-set man with a Texas drawl, leaned forward. Mighty convenient timing, if you ask me. Marcus's smile never wavered. Convenient for you. Certainly. The price remains the same, 50,000, for the entire spread. 50,000, Alina whispered to Jake. That ranch is worth 3 times that much. I know, Jake replied grimly. He's practically giving it away. Alina couldn't contain herself any longer. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I believe you're discussing my property." The dining room fell silent. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. "Alina, but you're supposed to be ... dead." Alina pulled off her hat, letting her hair fall around her shoulders. "Sorry to disappoint you, Marcus. But it takes more than a thunderstorm to kill me." The cattle buyers looked confused, glancing between Alina and Marcus. "I thought you said your wife was dead," the Texan said. Marcus recovered quickly, his politicians' smiles sliding back into place. "My dear, you gave me such a fright. When you disappeared from the church, I feared the worst. Where have you been?" "I've been recovering from being tied to a post and left to die by your men," Alina said loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear her. "The same men who killed Catherine Morrison, and Margaret Whitfield, and Susan Hayes." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're obviously distraught." "I'm not distraught. I'm angry." Alina stepped closer to him, her voice carrying across the room. "You married me to steal my father's ranch, then ordered your men to kill me, just like you did to your other wives. That's preposterous." Marcus looked around the room, clearly calculating his options. "Gentlemen, my wife has been through a terrible ordeal. She's not thinking clearly." Jake stood up, his hand resting on his gun. "She's thinking very clearly. And she's not the only one who knows the truth." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he recognized Jake. You're the one who's been asking questions, stirring up trouble." "I'm Catherine Morrison's brother," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "Remember her? Blonde hair, blue eyes, rode a black mare. You had her killed for 500 acres of grassland." The room erupted in whispers. Marcus raised his hands, trying to regain control. "These are wild accusations with no proof." "Actually, there's plenty of proof." Jake pulled out the leather portfolio Alina had seen at the cabin. "Letters between you and your lawyer, discussing the accidents that befell your previous wives. Financial records showing how you've been stealing property across the territory. Witness testimony from people who've seen your men in action." Marcus's mask finally slipped completely, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "You can't prove anything. And even if you could, you'll never live to see a courtroom." He made a gesture, and suddenly Alina realized that several of the men she had taken for ordinary diners were actually Marcus's hired guns. They were reaching for their weapons, preparing to eliminate the threat to their boss. "Get down," Jake shouted, drawing his gun with lightning speed. Alina threw herself behind an overturned table as gunfire erupted in the dining room. The cattle buyers scrambled for cover, shouting in confusion and fear. Jake returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. "Alina," he called out. "The back door." But Alina wasn't running. She had her own gun now, and she was through being a victim. She rose from behind the table and took aim at one of Marcus's men, remembering everything Jake had taught her about breathing and squeezing the trigger. The shot found its mark, and the man dropped his weapon with a cry of pain. "You always were too stubborn for your own good," Marcus snarled, appearing beside her with a gun pointed at her head. "But this time, I'll make sure you stay dead." Alina stared into Marcus's cold, gray eyes, seeing her own death reflected there. But she wasn't the same terrified woman who had been tied to that post. She was stronger now, harder, and she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "You made one mistake, Marcus," she said quietly. "You let me live long enough to learn how to fight back." Before he could react, Alina dropped to her knees and rolled away from him. Jake's gun boomed, and Marcus stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His weapon clattered to the floor. "It's over, Blackwood," Jake said, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. "The law's on its way." Indeed, Alina could hear the thunder of hoofbeats outside, and moments later, a dozen men in federal marshal's uniforms burst through the hotel doors. Leading them was a stern-faced man with a badge that gleamed in the lamplight. "Marshal Wade," Jake said, lowering his weapon. "Glad you could make it." "Got your telegram yesterday," the marshal replied. "Looks like we arrived just in time." He surveyed the scene, the overturned tables, the wounded gunman, Marcus clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder." "You can't prove anything," Marcus spat, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Actually, we can." Marshal Wade held up a thick folder. "We've been building a case against you for months. Mrs. Morrison's husband provided the final pieces of evidence we needed." Alina felt a surge of confusion. "Mrs. Morrison, but Catherine is dead." Jake's face reddened. Alina, there's something I need to tell you. Catherine wasn't my sister. She was my wife. The words hit Alina like a physical blow. Your wife. I'm sorry I lied to you, I thought. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know the truth. Jake's voice was heavy with guilt. Catherine was the love of my life. When Blackwood had her killed, I swore I'd make him pay. Alina felt the world tilt around her. Everything she thought she knew about Jake, about their relationship, had been built on a lie. You're married. I was married. Catherine's been dead for 8 months. Jake took a step toward her, but Alina backed away. Alina, please let me explain. No. Alina's voice was sharp with hurt and betrayal. You let me think. You let me believe. She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus laughed bitterly from where he sat bleeding on the floor. Touching another man who uses women for his own purposes. How fitting. Shut up, Jake snarled, his gun swinging toward Marcus. Easy, son, Marshal Wade said, placing a hand on Jake's arm. He's not worth it. The marshal's men were already shackling Marcus and his surviving gunmen. The cattle buyers, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, were giving statements to the deputies. Alina watched it all with a sense of detachment, still reeling from Jake's revelation. Mrs. Blackwood, Marshal Wade said, approaching her, I know this has been traumatic, but we'll need your testimony when this goes to trial. Of course, Alina replied numbly, whatever you need. The good news is that your marriage to Blackwood was fraudulent from the beginning. He was still legally married to his first wife when he wed you. She's alive and well in California. So you're free. Distant and unreal. Free. She was free of Marcus. Free of the sham marriage. Free to reclaim her life. So why did she feel so empty? Alina, Jake said quietly, appearing at her elbow. Can we talk? She looked at him, this man who had saved her life, who had taught her to be strong, who had made her believe in love again. This man who had been living a lie the entire time she'd known him. I don't think we have anything to say to each other, she said. Jake's face crumpled. Please, you don't understand. What I feel for you, what you feel for me, is guilt. Alina interrupted. You couldn't save your wife, so you saved me instead. But I'm not Catherine, Jake. I'm not her replacement. That's not true. Alina. Goodbye, Jake. Alina turned away from him, walking toward the hotel exit. Thank you for everything you've done, but I need to build my own life now. She could feel his eyes on her as she left, could hear him calling her name, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. Her heart was breaking. But she had learned something important over the past weeks. She was strong enough to survive anything, even losing the man she loved. 3 months later, Alina stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The place looked different now, better. She had used part of the money recovered from Marcus's illegal dealings to repair the damage his men had done, to rebuild what had been torn down. The ranch was prosperous again, the cattle healthy and the land well tended. Alina had hired good men to help her run the operation, and she had discovered that she had a natural talent for business. Her father would have been proud. But despite her success, despite the satisfaction of seeing justice done when Marcus was sentenced to life in prison, Alina felt a persistent ache in her chest. She missed Jake with an intensity that surprised her. She missed his quiet strength, his gentle hands, the way he had looked at her by firelight in the cabin. She had been too harsh with him at the hotel. In her hurt and shock, she had pushed him away without giving him a chance to explain. But the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid that he was right, that she was just a replacement for the wife he had lost. Afraid that loving him would make her vulnerable again. Miss Elena, her foreman, Tom Bradley, appeared in the doorway. There's someone here to see you. Elena's heart skipped, hoping despite herself that it might be Jake. But the woman who stepped onto the porch was a stranger, petite, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed familiar. Miss Davies. I'm Martha Chen. I run the boarding house. In Redemption, Elena recognized the name immediately. You're the woman who helped us. You sent information about Marcus's activities. I did. Martha smiled sadly. I thought you might want to know Jake Morrison left town yesterday. He's heading back to Colorado. Elena tried to keep her expression neutral, but Martha's perceptive eyes caught the flicker of pain that crossed her face. He's been staying at my place since the trial, Martha continued. Barely eating, barely sleeping. That man's been carrying a powerful load of guilt and grief. I'm sorry to hear that, Elena said carefully. But I don't see what it has to do with me. Don't you? Martha's voice was gentle but firm. Miss Davies, I've seen a lot of broken people pass through my doors. But I've also seen what real love looks like. That man didn't save you because you reminded him of his dead wife. He saved you because you're you. Elena's composure cracked slightly. How can you be sure? Because I knew Catherine Morrison. She stayed with me for a week before she married Marcus. Sweet girl, but nothing like you. Martha sat down in the rocking chair beside Elena. Catherine was timid, sheltered. She saw the world through rose-colored glasses. You, on the other hand, are fire and steel. You're strong in a way Catherine never was. Elena sank into the chair opposite Martha, defenses crumbling. He lied to me. He let me think she was his sister. Because he was ashamed. Martha said quietly. Ashamed that he couldn't protect his wife. Ashamed that he was falling in love with someone else. The man's been punishing himself for 8 months, and he was afraid you'd think less of him if you knew the truth. I don't think less of him, Elena whispered. I think less of myself for believing I could ever be enough for someone like him. Martha reached over and took Elena's hand. Child, that man looks at you like you hung the moon. I've watched him for 3 months, and he's never stopped talking about you. About how brave you were. How strong. How you refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. Elena felt tears threaten. It doesn't matter now. He's gone. Colorado's not that far, Martha said with a knowing smile. And a woman who can rebuild a ranch from nothing can certainly catch up to a man on horseback. Elena looked at the older woman, seeing wisdom and understanding in her eyes. What if I'm too late? Then you'll know you tried. But something tells me Jake Morrison isn't the kind of man to give up on love twice. That night, Elena lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, Martha's words echoing in her mind. She had built a good life for herself, had proven that she could survive anything. But surviving wasn't the same as living, and she couldn't truly live without Jake. By morning, her decision was made. Elena left the ranch before dawn, taking only what she could carry in her saddlebags. She had given Tom Bradley instructions for running the operation in her absence, though she hadn't told him how long she might be gone. She wasn't even sure herself. The trail to Colorado was well, but Elena knew Jake had a day's head start. She pushed her horse harder than she should have, driven by a growing sense of urgency. What if he had already reached his destination? What if he had decided to start over somewhere else entirely? The first day passed in a blur of sore muscles and determination. Elena had forgotten how exhausting long-distance riding could be, but she pressed on. As the sun began to set, she spotted smoke rising from a campfire ahead. Her heart leaped. Could it be Jake? Elena approached cautiously, her hand resting on her gun. But as she drew closer, she recognized the familiar silhouette sitting by the fire. Jake was staring into the flames, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion and defeat. You're pushing your horse too hard, Elena said, stepping into the firelight. Jake's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Elena, what are you doing here? Apparently, I'm chasing after a stubborn cowboy who left town without saying goodbye. Elena dismounted, her legs shaky from the long ride. Martha Chen came to see me. She said you were heading back to Colorado. Jake stood slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. I thought, after what happened at the hotel, I thought you never wanted to see me again. I was hurt, Elena admitted, and scared. But I've had time to think, and I realized something important. What's that? Elena took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I realized that I don't care if you loved Catherine first. I don't care if part of you always will. What I care about is whether you have room in your heart for me too. Jake's face crumpled with emotion. Elena, you don't understand. What I feel for you isn't about Catherine. It's not about guilt or trying to replace her. It's about your strength, your courage, the way you refuse to let anyone break you. Then why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Jake ran his hands through his hair, struggling with the words. Because I was ashamed. Catherine died because I wasn't there to protect her. I was away on a cattle drive, trying to make money to expand our ranch. She wrote to me about Marcus, but I didn't take her concerns seriously. I thought she was just nervous about getting married. Elena felt her heart break for him. You couldn't have known. I should have been there, Jake said fiercely. I should have seen what he was, should have protected her. Instead, I failed her completely. And you thought I would blame you for that. I thought you'd see me as weak, as someone who couldn't protect the people he loved. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. I was terrified of failing you too. Elena stepped closer to him, close enough to see the pain in his eyes. Jake, you didn't fail Catherine. Marcus Blackwood killed her, just like he tried to kill me. Just like he killed those other women. You're not responsible for his evil. But I am responsible for lying to you. Yes, you are. Elena's voice was gentle, but firm. But I understand why you did it. And I forgive you. Jake stared at her for a long moment, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. Elena, I need you to know something. What I feel for you is real. It's not about Catherine, or trying to replace her. And you're mine. I love you, Jake Morrison. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are. Because you're honorable, and strong, and gentle. Because you see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. Jake crossed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, pulling her into his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her hair. More than I ever thought possible. Elena tilted her face up to his, and when their lips met, it was like coming home. The kiss was tender at first, then deeper, full of all the longing and pain and hope they had carried for so long. When they finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. What happens now? Elena smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Now we figure out our future together. We have a ranch to run, a life to build. Our ranch. If you want it to be. I could use a partner, someone who knows cattle and horses and how to handle a gun. Jake's smile was brilliant. I'd like that. But are you sure? After everything that's happened. Elena thought of the scared woman who had been tied to that post in the storm, helpless and alone. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to fight for it. I'm sure, she said firmly. We've both been through hell, Jake, but we survived. We found each other, and that's worth fighting for. Jake kissed her again, longer this time, sealing their promise to each other. When they broke apart, Elena looked up at the stars, beginning to appear in the darkening sky. So, are we going back to Colorado or Texas? She asked. Jake considered for a moment. Actually, I was thinking we might try somewhere new. Start fresh, together. Elena smiled. I like the sound of that. Where did you have in mind? There's good land in Montana. Wide, open spaces, plenty of water, and no one who knows our history. No one who knows Marcus Blackwood. You mean? Exactly. We could build something completely our own. Elena felt a thrill of excitement. A new life. A new beginning. With the woman I love, Jake added, pulling her close again. Elena settled into his arms, feeling safe and cherished and hopeful for the first time in months. They had both been broken by loss and betrayal, but they had found healing in each other. And that was more than enough to build a future on. 1 year later, Elena stood in the doorway of their new home, watching Jake work with a young colt in the corral. The Montana ranch they had built together was everything they had dreamed of: rolling hills covered in green grass, a clear stream running through the property, an endless sky stretching to the horizon. Jake had been right about Montana. The territory was growing, with new settlers arriving every week, and their ranch was already turning a profit. But more than that, they had found peace here. No one knew their history, no one asked uncomfortable questions. They were simply Jake and Elena Morrison, a couple who had come west to build a life together. Elena smiled as she watched. Jake gentled the colt with patient hands and a soothing voice. He had changed over the past year, the haunted look gradually leaving his eyes. He still grieved for Catherine. Elena knew he always would, but he had learned to carry that grief without letting it consume him. He's beautiful, Elena said, walking over to lean against the corral fence. Jake looked up, his face breaking into the easy smile that never failed to make her heart skip. Smart too. He'll make a good riding horse in a few years. Or a good breeding stallion, Elena suggested. We're going to need more horses if we keep expanding. Jake finished with the colt and walked over to her, his hands finding her waist. Are you sure we're ready for that kind of growth? Elena laughed, pressing closer to him. Are you having second thoughts about our empire-building plans, Mr. Morrison? Never, Jake said, kissing her forehead. I just want to make sure we're not taking on more than we can handle. We can handle anything, Elena said with confidence. We've proven that already. Jake's expression grew serious. Elena, there's something I need to tell you. Elena felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. What is it? I got a letter from Marshal Wade yesterday. Marcus died in prison last week. Elena absorbed the news quietly. She had expected to feel more relief, satisfaction, closure. Instead, she felt only a mild sense of completion, as if a chapter of her life had finally ended. How do you feel about it? Jake asked, studying her face. I feel ... free, Elena said slowly. Completely free. He can't hurt anyone else now. Jake nodded, understanding. I feel the same way. Like we can finally put the past behind us completely. Alina took his hands in hers. The past made us who we are, Jake. I don't want to forget it entirely, but I don't want to live in it either. What do you want to live in? Alina smiled, looking around at the ranch they had built together, at the life they had created from nothing. I want to live in this moment, in all the moments we'll have together. Jake's eyes softened. I love you, Alina. Morrison, I love you too. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land. Alina thought about the terrified woman she had been just over a year ago, tied to a post in a storm, certain she was going to die. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of complete belonging. Jake, she said suddenly, do you ever think about having children? Jake's hands tightened on her waist. Do you? I think about it a lot lately. About little ones running around the ranch, learning to ride, helping with the animals. Jake's smile was tender. I think Catherine would have liked that. She always said she wanted a house full of children. Alina felt no jealousy at the mention of his first wife. Catherine was part of Jake's history, part of what had made him the man Alina loved. I think she would have liked you to be happy. I am happy, Jake said, pulling her into his arms. Happier than I ever thought I could be again. Alina stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting the promise of their future on his lips. They had both been through fire and emerged stronger. They had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful in the light dot as they walked back toward the house. Alina caught sight of a rider approaching in the distance. For a moment, old fears stirred, but Jake's steady presence beside her reminded her that they were safe now. Whatever the future brought, they would face it together. The rider turned out to be their neighbor, Tom Carson, bringing news that his wife had safely delivered their third child. Alina and Jake congratulated him warmly, and as they watched him ride away, Alina felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been searching for all her life, without knowing it. Not just love, but partnership. Not just safety, but strength. Not just survival, but true living. That night, as they lay in their bed with the windows open to the Montana breeze, Alina traced lazy patterns on Jake's chest. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night? She asked that. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I try not to think about it. It's too terrible to imagine. But you did find me. And you saved me. We saved each other, Jake corrected. You saved me from drowning in grief and guilt. You gave me a reason to live again. Alina smiled in the darkness. We make a good team. The best, Jake agreed, his arms tightening around her. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Alina closed her eyes, feeling completely at peace. Outside, the Montana wind sang through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but the love they had built in its aftermath would last forever. She had been tied outside in the storm, helpless and alone, but the cowboy had untied her and carried her to safety. And in saving her, he had saved himself. It was, Alina thought, as she drifted off to sleep, the most beautiful love story she had ever heard. And the best part was, it was theirs. In the end, Alina and Jake Morrison built one of the most successful ranches in Montana territory. They had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls who grew up strong and free on the wide open plains. Alina never forgot the lesson she learned that stormy night, that even in the darkest moments, hope could arrive on horseback. And Jake never forgot that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply refusing to let go. They lived long, full lives, surrounded by family and friends, respected by their community, and deeply in love until the very end. Their story became legend in Montana, not as a tale of tragedy and revenge, but as a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled across the plains, people would sometimes claim they could hear the thunder of hoofbeats and remember the cowboy